She was sitting alone on the park bench, clutching the hem of her skirt like it was the only thing holding her together. When I crouched down to ask if she was okay, her lips trembled and she whispered, "Please, don't lift my skirt." The whole world kept walking past, but I knew if I did nothing, I'd regret it forever. The wind skimmed across the park like a cool hand, lifting the smell of roasted chestnuts from the vendor's brazier and threading it through the laughter swirling around the carousel. Ethan Price adjusted the strap of the canvas backpack on his shoulder and matched his daughter's skipping steps along the paved path. Lily's fingers were small and certain in his palm, the kind of warm, simple anchor that had gotten him through 1,000 quiet evenings since the funeral. Adventure Day wasn't fancy, never had been, but it was theirs, a walk, a treat, a new corner of the same old city to notice together. "Daddy, can we get the swirly one?" Lily pointed toward the ice cream truck, already bouncing on her toes as the bell chimed. The sun caught the loose wisps of her hair and turned them bright as candlelight. "We'll see," he teased, stretching the promise as far as a grin would let him. "Let's earn it with a lap around the pond." He almost kept moving. Almost. The day was behaving, and routine was precious. But something nipped at the edge of his vision, a kink in the easy rhythm, and he turned his head. On a weathered bench not far from the path, a young woman sat with her body folded in on itself, as if a strong wind might fold her further. Hair dark and tangled curtained her face. Her shoulders hovered, tight and narrow, like she was holding her breath. Both hands gripped the hem of a pale blue skirt. Knuckles white. Stillness so absolute it felt loud. "Daddy." Lily tugged his hand again, then followed his gaze. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer at once. Habit warred with instinct. For 2 years he had trained himself to keep Lily's days gentle, predictable, safe. He knew about broken things, their sharp edges, the ways they cut the hands that tried to fix them. But he also knew the tug that rose in his chest now, that stubborn mechanic's certainty that if something was wrong and he had 2 working hands, he didn't get to look away. He knelt a little, getting on Lily's level. "1 second, bug," he murmured, soft enough that the wind might keep the words. "Stay right by me." As they drew closer, the woman's head lifted just a fraction. Tear tracks glistened on her cheeks. Her eyes darted like a cornered animal measuring exits. When she spoke, her voice was so thin the breeze nearly took it. "Please, don't lift my skirt." The sentence dropped between them with a weight that didn't fit the bright morning, the kind of weight that made passers-by glance, grimace, and keep walking. Lily's fingers tightened. Ethan felt the same reflex in his chest, a protective clamp, a tension that carried memory with it. Nights he'd spent listening to his daughter's breathing in a too-quiet house, learning the languages of grief and fear by ear. He crouched a few feet from the bench, careful, palms open. "Hey," he said, gentling his voice as if it were a tool that could mar soft wood. "You look like you might need help." The woman shook her head fast, hair brushing her cheeks. "No, just, please don't." Her hands clenched the fabric harder, as if the skirt were the last thread holding her together. He kept his breath even. "My name's Ethan," he offered, as though names could build a small bridge over cold water. "This is my daughter, Lily. We're not here to hurt you." Her gaze slid away and then back, skittering like a sparrow. Something about the posture, the shiver he could see traveling her legs beneath the fabric, unsettled him past politeness. "Respect her boundary," one voice said. "Something is wrong," another insisted. Both were true, and the truth between them was where he had to stand. "Can you tell me," he tried again, "why you don't want anyone to touch your skirt?" "Because if you do," she whispered, lips trembling, "you'll see." The words were shaped by shame, not threat. Shame that soaked the blue cotton and made the morning seem suddenly colder. He followed her glance downward. Even from where he crouched, he could see the faint tremor in her calf, the way her right foot sat at an angle that meant pain more than rest. The hem of the skirt showed a darker patch, like something had already begun to tell its story without her permission. Ethan's jaw tightened. He shifted his body, so Lily stood a step behind his shoulder, shielded but close. Inside him, the old training of steady hands and practical steps lined up in order: assess, stabilize, protect. But this wasn't a broken belt or a leaking line. This was a person, scared enough to negotiate with the world by clutching fabric. He softened his tone another notch, the way he did when Lily woke from a bad dream, and needed a light left on. I hear you. I do. And I won't do anything you don't want. But if you're hurt, maybe letting me look will help me help you. For a moment, nothing moved but the wind and the carousel horses turning slow and bright at the edge of the scene. Then her fingers loosened, just a fraction, like a muscle remembering how to unclench. Lily leaned closer, whispering, "Dad." "It's okay," he said aloud, to both of them. "We're just going to breathe." He didn't reach yet. He gave the woman time enough to choose help, not have it taken. In that held breath of a moment, the park's easy music felt far away. What remained were three people in a small circle of air, deciding whether fear or trust would drive the next minute. Ethan steadied his hands. He had come for ice cream and small wonders. Instead, he found a crossroads. And even as the chestnut smoke curled around them and a bell chimed somewhere behind him, he knew which path he was going to take. The world had carried on around them, careless and bright, but inside that small radius of air where Ethan knelt, everything had gone still. Clara's words, "Please don't lift my skirt," hung between them with the awkward gravity of something that didn't belong in daylight. A phrase that should have been nonsense in a park full of families instead carried the unmistakable weight of fear and humiliation. Ethan kept his posture low, steady, like a man working under the hood of a car, careful not to startle. The mechanic in him knew about fragile things, threads that snapped if handled rough, joints that seized if forced. This woman's voice sounded like one of those threads. Clara's fingers strangled the fabric at her knees. Each knuckle gleamed bone white, her body wound so tight it looked painful. She shook her head as though the motion alone might push him away. "No, just don't," she whispered, breath broken. "Okay," Ethan answered, even though his chest rebelled against the word. He glanced at Lily, whose wide eyes shone with confusion. He shifted just enough to shield her with his shoulder. "It's all right, Bug. Just stand close." He turned back, focusing on Clara, trying to keep his own urgency out of his tone. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But you look hurt, and I can't just walk away." Her lips trembled. She pressed them together hard, as though sealing in words that threatened to spill out. Her gaze darted to the path where strangers walked by, their eyes quick to slide past. Ethan felt heat rise under his skin at the way people could witness suffering and step around it like litter. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Why don't you want anyone to touch your skirt?" Her chest rose with a ragged inhale. "Because if you do," she hesitated, eyes flicking down at herself and then away, face collapsing under the weight of her own shame. "You'll see." Ethan's gut twisted. The words were not defiance. They were surrender dressed as warning, a way of telling the world, "If you make me prove what I already know, you'll see the mess I've become." He softened his voice further. "See what?" Her throat worked, but no sound came. Her lashes trembled with tears unshed. He noticed her legs shaking beneath the cloth, a tremor that had nothing to do with cold. That crooked angle at her foot, it confirmed what his instincts had already whispered. Pain. Injury. Something deeper than embarrassment. Ethan's instincts clashed again. Respect her plea, or ignore it to save her from worse harm. He remembered nights after his wife's passing when Lily had cried herself to sleep. If he had left her alone because she said go away, she would have stayed in her pain longer than she needed. Sometimes people's words weren't shields. They were wounds trying to hide. He tilted his head so Clara could see his face clearly. "Listen, I'm not here to shame you. I'm Ethan. This is Lily. We just came for ice cream. That's it. But when you said those words, I heard something in them. You're not safe like this. If you let me, I want to help." Her jaw clenched. For a long beat, silence filled the space, and only the creak of carousel music carried from across the path. Then, with the smallest exhale, Clara whispered, "You'll see I'm broken." The words hit him harder than any refusal. His voice steadied on instinct. "Being hurt isn't the same as being broken. I fix things. That's what I do. But I can't if I don't understand what's wrong." Her eyes searched his, as if measuring whether pity or judgment hid there. Instead, she found only a father's determined calm, the same one that had patched Lily's scraped knees and chased off her nightmares. For the first time, Clara's grip loosened, fingers easing on the fabric, knuckles softening. Ethan felt the moment stretch, fragile as glass. He hadn't lifted the skirt yet, but her loosening hands were an unspoken permission, or at least the absence of refusal. Enough for him to draw one steady breath. preparing himself for what truth waited beneath. Lily whispered behind him, "Daddy, what's wrong with her?" Ethan answered without looking away from Clara, "We're about to find out, sweetheart." And in that moment, Ethan knew, whatever he uncovered, it would not only change Clara's day, it would change all of theirs. Ethan waited until Clara's fingers loosened that final fraction, the way a jammed bolt gives after careful pressure. He didn't move fast. He let her see his hands first, open, steady, clean of any hurry. Then he slid one palm under the hem just enough to lift the fabric an inch, then two, then three. He kept his body between Clara and the drifting eyes of passers-by, angling himself so Lily, too, would see only his back and not the rawness he suspected waited underneath. The morning's carousel music thinned to a tinny thread behind the thud of his own pulse. The pale blue cotton rose, and with it, the truth. Clara's right shin looked wrong at a glance, and worse on inspection. Swelling bulged tight beneath the skin, mottled purple spreading like storm clouds over bone. Near the knee, a clean-edged gash had opened and then clotted badly, a thin, stubborn line of blood still sneaking through to stain the skirt's inner edge. Her foot sat at an angle that no relaxed limb would choose, a small defiance of alignment that screamed injury to anyone who knew how a body ought to rest. Ethan inhaled so sharply the breath grazed his teeth. Behind him, Lily's voice slipped out on a gasp, small and stricken. "Daddy, her leg." He let the hem fall at once, the skirt whispering back into place like a curtain after an unwelcome preview. "Okay," he said softly, his tone the tone of a man turning from diagnosis toward solution. "I've seen enough." He met Clara's eyes, not flinching, not pitying. "You're hurt. Badly." Clara's jaw trembled. She tried to set her mouth in a line that meant "I can handle it," but the line wavered. "I told you," she whispered, shame and pain braided in the words. "If you looked, you'd see." "What I see," Ethan answered, gentler than before, "is a wound that needs care. That's all." He shifted a half step so the bench backed her like a wall, and he, not the path, stood between her and the world. "Can you wiggle your toes for me?" She hesitated, then tried. The motion sent a bolt of pain up her calf. A hiss escaped her teeth. I can a little." "Okay, that's good information." His voice stayed level. The mechanic's cadence, simple, factual, resolute. "How did it happen?" Clara's gaze skittered off again, at a couple strolling by, at the vendor's plume of chestnut smoke, at anything not his face. "I fell," she murmured. The words held no detail and too much meaning. "On stairs. A window? The ground?" His questions were gentle probes, not prying, edging only as far as today required. "Ground. A swallow. Last night." Ethan considered the swelling, the spreading bruise, the angle of the foot. He had seen sprains and fractures both, and while he wouldn't declare either here, his gut told him this wasn't a bruise you walked off. He kept his next words slow and careful, the vowels rounded with respect. "We need to get that cleaned, wrapped, and looked at by someone who knows bones." Clara's back stiffened. "No hospital." The phrase came out faster than breath, as if prepared in advance. "Please." He nodded, absorbing the speed of her fear. "Okay, I hear you. We can start somewhere else." He let the plan assemble aloud, step by step, so she could see the path. "I have a first aid kit at home. A friend, she's a nurse, can meet us there. Minimal questions. We stabilize, then figure out next steps." Clara's lashes flickered. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've been where you are," he almost said, "on the wrong side of a day, with pride the only thing keeping you upright." Instead, he settled on the truth that fit this moment. "Because you're hurt, and I can help. That's enough." Silence opened between them again, not hostile, but heavy with calculation. Pain, strangers, a child watching. Trust was a door that stuck for good reason. Ethan didn't push. He placed his hand on the knob and waited. Lily shifted closer until her shoulder brushed his arm. "We have Band-Aids with dinosaurs," she offered timidly, as if the promise of cartoon creatures might tip the scales. The earnestness in her face pulled a tiny, startled sound from Clara, something not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "Dinosaurs are good," Clara whispered, the corner of her mouth lifting and falling again. The small movement cost her something. He could see it in the tension around her eyes. "Okay," Ethan said, catching the opening. "Here's what we'll do. I'll help you stand. We'll go slow, No sudden weight on that foot. We'll get you to my truck. It's close. He angled his body, offering his forearm rather than his hands, giving her the dignity of choosing where to place her grip. You set the pace. Clara stared at his arm, then at his face. Whatever she was scanning for, danger, mockery, strings, she didn't find it. She nodded once. When she reached for him, her fingers were colder than he expected. He adjusted, taking the load carefully, feeling the minute tremors travel from her muscles into his. Lily, he said over his shoulder, walk on Clara's other side. Hold her bag for her. I've got it, Lily chirped, eager, solemn in the way children become when given a job that matters. They rose together. The first inch cost the most. Clara's breath snagged. She closed her eyes and set her teeth. Easy, Ethan murmured. We'll pivot your weight onto the good leg. On 3. 1, 2. He guided, not forcing, timing his support to her instinct to stand. 3. They managed 3 careful steps before the foot tried to betray her and nearly folded. Ethan tightened his hold, converting a fall into a lean. I've got you, he said, meaning it the way you mean a promise, not a phrase. By the time they reached the path, passers-by had begun to pretend not to see again, the way people do when they suspect kindness might tax them. The carousel bell chimed, oblivious, and the vendor turned another chestnut with his metal scoop. Life's ordinary gears kept grinding while they, this small, odd trio, moved through them, slow and precise. At the curb, Ethan paused, letting Clara rest. Sweat had gathered at her temples despite the cool breeze. He met her eye. 10 minutes, he said. Then warmth, water, and help. She swallowed, throat tight. Okay. He squeezed his forearm lightly under her hand. A signal, not a squeeze, and steered them toward the truck. The skirt fluttered around her calf like a tired flag, hiding the injury again from the world. But he had seen. And with seeing came responsibility he didn't intend to put down. As he opened the passenger door and helped her ease onto the seat, Clara's breath shuddered out. I'm sorry, she blurted, a reflex apology for taking up space. You don't owe me sorry, Ethan said. You owe yourself care. He buckled her in, then checked on Lily, who had already climbed into the back with the solemnity of a trainee nurse. He closed the door gently, the sound sealing the moment. The skirt was down again. The secret, technically, hidden, but its truth had already changed the shape of the day, and, he suspected, more than the day. He rounded the hood, slid behind the wheel, and in the rearview mirror met Clara's wary eyes. We'll handle this, he said simply. One step at a time. The truck rumbled to life beneath Ethan's hands, a sound that usually meant comfort, old machinery still loyal after years of use. Today, though, the low growl carried a tension of its own. He glanced into the rearview mirror where Lily was buckling herself in with exaggerated care, her little brow furrowed like she was holding up part of the sky. In the passenger seat, Clara sat stiff as the seatbelt across her chest, her skirt carefully smoothed back over her legs as if she could erase what had already been seen. You're safe, Ethan said, his voice quieter than the engine. We'll get you taken care of. No hospitals, Clara repeated, more firmly now, though her voice quivered on the last word. Her knuckles clutched the armrest, and her eyes darted to the window like she was scanning for exits even as the truck stayed parked. Ethan rested both hands on the steering wheel but didn't shift into drive yet. He turned his head toward her, steady, not demanding. All right, no hospitals if that's what you need. But you can't sit in a park with a leg like that. You'll end up with an infection, or worse. Let me take you to my place. It's close, 10 minutes. I've got a first aid kit and a friend who's a nurse. She can come by, no paperwork, no questions you don't want asked. Clara's throat worked as she swallowed. She pulled her hands into her lap, gripping the fabric of her skirt again, her nervous tether. Why would you do that for me? She asked, her voice thin, suspicious. You don't even know me. Ethan breathed in slow, filling his lungs, giving himself time to choose the truth that mattered most. Because you're hurt. Because I've been on the other side of a day like this, different reasons, but the same feeling that nobody's on your side. I won't leave you like that. For a long moment, she didn't respond. Her eyes traveled from the dashboard to the windshield, as if answers might be written on the glass. Lily leaned forward between the seats, her voice small but sure. We help people, right, Daddy? He glanced back at her, the corner of his mouth twitching despite the heaviness in his chest. That's right, Bug. We help people. Clara's lips trembled, but no words came. She just shook her head once, slow, then whispered, I don't want trouble. You're not trouble, Ethan countered, his tone carrying a quiet finality. You're a person who needs help. That's all. The silence stretched again, filled only by the engine's patient idle. Clara's eyes brimmed, but she blinked fast, trying to chase the tears away before they fell. Finally, she gave the smallest of nods, almost imperceptible, as though any larger gesture might break her resolve. That's enough for me, Ethan said softly. He shifted the truck into gear, his movements calm and practiced, like a man setting out on an ordinary errand. The wheels rolled forward, crunching gravel as they left the park behind. Clara's shoulders sagged a fraction, exhaustion seeping into her frame now that the decision had been made. Her gaze fell to her lap, and for the first time, she let go of the hem of her skirt. Her hands lay flat against her thighs, open, vulnerable. You'll see, she murmured suddenly, voice almost lost to the road noise. See what? Ethan asked gently. That I don't deserve this. He tightened his grip on the wheel, heat prickling behind his ribs. That's not for you to decide right now. Deserving's got nothing to do with it. You're here, and you're hurt. That's reason enough. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw her watching him, weighing whether to believe a stranger's conviction. Then she leaned her head against the window, the faint reflection of street lamps catching the tear that finally escaped. In the back seat, Lily began humming quietly to herself, the tune off-key but steady, a child's way of holding the air together. Ethan let the sound fill the cab, not interrupting. It was the kind of music that didn't demand anything, just soften the space so people could breathe. 10 minutes. That was all he needed to get her somewhere safe. 10 minutes to make good on the offer she'd just, reluctantly, accepted. And 10 minutes for Ethan to realize that this choice, the decision to help, would tie all three of their lives together in ways he couldn't yet see. The truck eased onto the main road, its old shocks groaning with every bump. Ethan drove carefully, slower than usual, as if the tires carried not only passengers but the weight of the decision Clara had just made. His hands rested steady at 10 and 2, his eyes flicking between the road ahead and the reflection in the rearview mirror. In the mirror, Lily sat upright, her backpack on her lap like a shield. She peered at Clara with the solemn curiosity only an 8-year-old could manage, equal parts worry and wonder. Every so often, she offered a small smile, as if her very expression might patch whatever invisible hole Clara was falling through. Beside him, Clara sat pressed against the passenger door. Her forehead leaned against the glass, skin pale against the reflection of passing trees. The skirt, carefully smoothed earlier, had slipped to reveal the edge of her knee, the fabric stained where blood had seeped through. She made no move to adjust it this time. Instead, her hands stayed clasped together, fingers twisting each other until they went red. Ethan cleared his throat gently, not wanting to startle her. What's your name? Her eyes flickered but didn't leave the window. CL, she whispered, like the syllables themselves weighed more than they should. CL, Ethan repeated, testing the sound. Does that stand for something? She hesitated, then let out the answer like an unguarded sigh. Clara. Well, Clara, he said, giving the name its full space. You're safe now. That's the only thing that matters in this truck. The words hung there. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. But then she turned her head slightly, enough for him to see the glisten in her eyes. Safe doesn't last, she murmured. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel, leather creaking beneath his palms. He understood the rhythm of those words, the cadence of someone who had learned not to trust reprieves. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that safety could last, that he had built his whole life around giving that to Lily. But he knew better than to offer promises he couldn't yet prove. Instead, he said, sometimes it lasts long enough to catch your breath, long enough to start again. Silence answered him, but it was softer this time. Not rejection, just the silence of someone turning words over like stones in a pocket. Lily leaned forward, her voice small but certain. We have cocoa at home, she said. Daddy always makes it too hot, but I blow on it for him. Clara blinked, startled by the sudden offering. The corner of her mouth twitched, as if it wanted to rise but had forgotten how. Cocoa, she repeated faintly, almost like the word belonged to another world. Best in town, Ethan added, trying for lightness without forcing it. Though I've been told my marshmallow ratio is questionable. That earned him a tiny sound from Clara. Half laugh, half breath caught wrong. She shook her head, eyes shining again. Why are you both like this? Like what? Ethan asked. Kind, she whispered, as if the word itself was foreign. Lily's answer came before his. Because it feels better. The truck carried them through a short stretch of silence, punctuated only by the rhythm of tires on asphalt. Clara shifted slightly, the first time she had moved of her own since leaving the bench. The gesture was small, but Ethan noticed. It was the body's way of saying, maybe I can stay upright a little longer. He let the road unwind under them, the minutes counting down in his head. 10 minutes to home. 10 minutes until Clara would have to decide again whether to trust him, trust his friend, trust the space he offered. He kept his eyes steady, his voice quiet, his presence large enough to hold the fear without pressing it. As the old truck crested the last hill before his neighborhood, Ethan risked another glance in the mirror. Lily was humming again, chin propped on her backpack. Clara wasn't looking out the window anymore. Her gaze had dropped to her lap, her lips moving silently, as if she were reciting something to herself, maybe a prayer, maybe just the act of keeping breathing. Ethan faced forward once more, jaw tight with determination. Whatever lay behind Clara was dark enough to make her run, dark enough to make her bleed. But what lay ahead, if he had anything to do with it, would be different. Almost there, he said, his voice steady, as the truck turned down the quiet street that led to his house. Just a few more minutes. The old truck groaned into the gravel driveway, dust rising in lazy curls behind them. Ethan cut the engine, and for a moment the silence pressed in, broken only by the faint ticking of hot metal cooling. He glanced at Clara. Her forehead had left a faint oval on the passenger window. Her body sagged with exhaustion, but her hands still clenched in her lap like fists she had forgotten to release. Home, Ethan said simply. We'll take it slow. Getting Clara from the truck to the front door was a careful process. Ethan looped her arm over his shoulder, his other arm steady around her waist. Lily hovered close on Clara's opposite side, carrying the small tote that had been abandoned on the park bench. Each step was a negotiation between Clara's pain and Ethan's determination. She winced with every shift of weight, but not once did she complain. By the time they crossed the threshold of his modest house, her face shone with a sheen of sweat, her breath short and ragged. The kitchen greeted them with its familiar scent, coffee grounds lingering from the morning, a faint trace of lemon dish soap. It was small, square, the kind of room lived in rather than designed. Wooden cabinets softened by years of touch, a table scarred with knife marks and crayon doodles, mismatched mugs stacked in the dish rack. Ethan helped Clara into a chair, easing her down slowly until her injured leg rested on another chair he pulled close. Stay here, he said, voice low but firm. I'll get the kit. Clara nodded faintly, eyes fixed on the floorboards. Lily set the tote on the counter, then climbed onto another chair, watching Clara with a seriousness that made her look far older than 8. Ethan returned with a dented metal box, its hinges squeaking as he opened it. We'll clean this as best we can, but I don't want to make things worse. He pulled out gauze, antiseptic, and tape with the practiced efficiency of a man who had patched too many skinned knees and garage mishaps. Before he could begin, he heard the knock on the back door. Maria stepped in without waiting. She had long ago earned the right. Dark hair tied back, scrub top under a hoodie, her presence was brisk comfort. You said urgent, she remarked, taking in the scene with one sweep of her sharp eyes. Let me. Ethan exhaled and stepped aside, relief sliding off his shoulders. Clara, this is Maria. She's a nurse. Trust her. Clara looked up warily, but Maria's no-nonsense expression seemed to settle something in her. Maria knelt, snapping on gloves. We'll start with cleaning. Might sting. Her voice was steady, neither pitying nor prying, the exact tone Clara needed. As Maria worked, Clara sat motionless, jaw tight. The antiseptic hissed against the wound, and her fingers dug into the edges of the chair, but she didn't flinch. Only her eyes betrayed her, darting once toward the door as if afraid someone else might follow Maria in. You're doing fine, Maria murmured, wrapping the gauze with gentle precision. Looks like a nasty sprain or maybe a hairline fracture. You'll need an X-ray eventually, but for now this will hold. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching. His chest tightened as he saw Clara's lips pressed white with the effort of staying silent. He wanted to say something, anything, but he knew words could sometimes weigh too much. Instead, he busied himself making coffee, filling the room with the earthy aroma of brewing grounds. When Maria finished, she stripped off her gloves and stood. She's stable for tonight. Keep her leg elevated. I'll check back tomorrow. She gave Ethan a look that carried both reassurance and warning. But she can't avoid real care forever. Ethan nodded. I know. Maria touched Clara's shoulder lightly. You're safe here. Rest. Then she packed her kit and slipped out as quickly as she'd come. The kitchen grew quiet again. The bandage stood out stark white against Clara's pale skin, her leg now cradled by the chair. She sat hunched, her gaze fixed on the wood grain of the table. Ethan pulled out a chair opposite her, setting 2 steaming mugs down. Coffee for himself, cocoa for Clara. The rising steam curled between them like a bridge. Clara, he said gently, whatever happened to you, you don't have to carry it alone. For the first time, her lips parted in something close to confession. Her voice trembled, breaking halfway through. I was running from my stepfather. The last word caught like a jagged edge in her throat. Last night he tried again. I escaped through the window. But I fell. I thought if people saw, they'd just judge me. Ethan's jaw clenched, fury and sorrow rising like twin flames. He forced his voice steady. No one here will judge you. Not me. Not Lily. Not Maria. You're safe. Clara's eyes lifted at last, meeting his. For a moment she searched, looking for pity, for disgust, for disbelief. She found none. Only a man steady enough to hold the truth she had risked speaking. And for the first time since the park, she let out a breath that wasn't laced with fear. The kitchen was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muted clink of Lily arranging mugs on the counter. Clara's words still hung in the air, raw, trembling, a wound torn open by her own admission. I was running from my stepfather. The syllables sat between them heavier than any secret Ethan had ever carried. Clara stared at the steaming mug before her, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if she were afraid to touch something warm, something offered freely. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, each breath thin and shaky. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet but unblinking, daring him to doubt her. Ethan leaned forward, forearms braced on the scarred wood of the table. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't lean in too close. He simply let his voice fill the space where her fear had lived. Clara, he said steadily, you don't have to explain more than you want. But you need to know you are safe here. He can't get to you in this house. Her lips parted, trembling. You don't know him. He doesn't stop. Ethan's jaw tightened, the memory of late nights spent fixing broken machines rising unbidden. He knew the look of damage caused by relentless force. He also knew how to stand between a problem and the people he loved. Then he'll have to go through me first. Clara's shoulders shuddered, caught between disbelief and relief. Why? She whispered. Why would you put yourself in the middle of this? You don't even know me. I could be lying. I could. Her words trailed into silence, too fragile to complete. You're not lying. Ethan interrupted quietly. His eyes held hers, unwavering. I've seen lies before. They look different. This is pain, and no one deserves to face it alone. The defiance in her eyes faltered. Her chin dipped, and her fingers twisted together until her knuckles turned white. Tears spilled fast now, running unchecked down her cheeks. I thought, if people knew, they'd just see weakness. Or worse, they'd blame me. Her voice broke, sharp with shame. Ethan's voice deepened, low and sure. No, this isn't your fault. It never was. Don't let his actions write your story. The words seemed to strike something deep within her, as if no one had ever said them aloud before. She bowed her head, pressing both hands over her face. The sound of her crying filled the small kitchen, and for a long moment Ethan just sat there, steady, the kind of presence that didn't need to speak. From the doorway, Lily peeked in, holding 2 mugs of cocoa carefully in both hands. She hesitated, eyes wide at the sight of Clara's tears, then tiptoed forward. It's okay, she whispered softly, as if speaking to a frightened bird. She set 1 mug in front of Clara. The steam rose, carrying the faint scent of chocolate and sugar. Clara lowered her hands slowly, her eyes red and wet. She looked at the small offering, then at the little girl who had brought it. Something fragile shifted in her expression, a hint of disbelief that anyone, let alone a child, would offer comfort so freely. A faint smile trembled at the corner of her lips, the first Ethan had seen all day. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. Lily smiled back, the kind of bright, uncomplicated smile that carried no judgment, only warmth. She returned to her seat, sipping her cocoa with a seriousness that made Ethan's chest ache. Clara wrapped her fingers around the mug. The heat seeped into her palms, grounding her. She lifted her eyes once more, this time finding not pity but steady determination in Ethan's gaze. And in that moment, Clara realized she was no longer running alone. The cocoa cooled slowly between Clara's palms, its faint sweetness curling up in steam that softened the edges of the room. The bandages on her leg were snug and white against the bruises, but her face still carried the stiffness of someone waiting for the next blow to fall. Ethan watched her carefully, not intrusively, the way a mechanic watches an engine after a repair, listening for the smallest sound that might reveal deeper trouble. Clara stared into the mug as though the dark liquid might give her answers. Her voice was quiet, more steady than before, but still thin at the edges. "He'll come looking. He always does. And if anyone finds out where I am," she shook her head, the thought unraveling her courage. "I don't want to bring danger into your home." Ethan leaned forward, his hands folded on the table, his voice deliberate. "Clara, you're not bringing danger. He is. That's on him, not on you." His jaw flexed, and his eyes locked onto hers. "You're not going back there. Not tonight, not ever. You have my word." Her gaze searched his, raw and uncertain. "You can't promise that," she whispered. "Not when you don't know what he's capable of." "I don't need to know him," Ethan replied. "I just need to know you. And I know you deserve better than fear. That's enough." The words settled between them like stone, heavy and immovable. For the first time, Clara's shoulders lowered, not all the way, but enough to show the smallest sliver of release. A tear slipped down her cheek, softer than the others, not born of terror, but of relief that she wasn't prepared to trust yet, but wanted to. Across the table, Lily swung her legs and leaned forward, her eyes bright and intent. "Daddy always keeps his promises," she said, her voice matter-of-fact, as if she were stating a law of nature. Clara blinked at her, startled by the certainty in such a small voice. Something in that assurance, in the way Lily believed without hesitation, tugged at the fragile thread of Clara's defenses. Her lips curved, hesitant, fleeting, but real, into the first genuine smile Ethan had seen from her. It was small, but it was everything. Ethan sat back, letting the silence stretch without rushing it. In the kitchen's soft light, with the scent of cocoa and coffee mingling, the moment felt like the start of something neither of them had expected when the day began. He hadn't gone to the park to save anyone. He had gone for ice cream and laughter. But life had a way of laying broken things at his feet, and he had never been the kind of man to step over them. Clara lifted the mug and took a slow sip. The warmth spread across her features, and she closed her eyes briefly, as if allowing herself one breath of peace. When she opened them again, she looked at Ethan, her voice steadier than before. "Thank you." He shook his head gently. "You don't need to thank me. Just rest. That's all I ask tonight." The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't heavy with fear. It was the silence of a pause, an inhale before the next step. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint creak of branches. Inside, the three of them sat in the circle of a promise unspoken yet undeniable. Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't be simple. Trouble had already been invited into their lives, whether he'd wanted it or not. But looking at Clara's fragile smile and Lily's earnest, unwavering faith, he felt the shape of a vow take root in his chest. He had lifted her skirt only far enough to see the wound. What it revealed was more than an injury. It was a life that needed protection, a story that deserved a different ending. And though he hadn't planned it, Ethan understood. From this night forward, their lives were bound together. Not by pity, not by accident, by a promise.